Hallo und herzlich willkommen an alle zu unserem Workshop hier zu spekulativen Zukünften 2030 über Nacht. Warum wir diesen Workshop geben, der Background dahinter ist so ein bisschen, wir als CityLAB, wir nennen uns ja auch gern so ein Experimentierlabor für die Zukunft. Wir entwickeln Strategien für die Zukunft, wie die Digitalisierung für das Gemeinwohl genutzt werden kann. Und dann stellt sich natürlich irgendwann so ein bisschen die Frage, was ist denn die Zukunft? Oder warum maßen wir uns denn an, irgendwie über die Zukunft entscheiden zu können und in die Zukunft Strategien reinzubilden? Und genau darum soll es heute in dem Workshop so ein bisschen gehen, dass wir die Themen behandeln, was bedeutet denn eigentlich Zukunft und wie können wir mit dem Thema Zukunft umgehen? Wie Zukunft ist ja immer irgendwas Unvorhersehbares. Es hat noch niemand die große Kugel entdeckt, in die man reingucken kann und genau sagen kann, was in 20, 30 Jahren stattfinden wird. Nichtsdestotrotz gibt es aber Methoden, mit denen wir uns heute beschäftigen werden, mit denen wir schon mal quasi einen spekulativen Blick in die Zukunft werfen können und vielleicht rausfinden können, was dort auf uns warten kann, auch gerade in Kombination mit Technologien und so eben ein bisschen herausarbeiten können, was sind denn auch wünschenswerte Zukünfte oder nicht wünschenswerte Zukünfte und wie können wir eben heute im Hier und Jetzt schon die Weichen stellen, dass wir vielleicht mit unserer Gesellschaft, mit unserer Politik und allem in die Richtung uns hinbewegen, wo es dann letzten Endes mal hingehen soll oder wir hoffen, dass es hingehen soll. Der Workshop wird in Englisch stattfinden. Wir haben dazu hier eine Umfrage nochmal geschaltet, die ihr hier rechts neben Chat Umfrage sehen könnt, wo wir nochmal fragen, wer Deutsch spricht und wer Englisch spricht. Falls es ein paar Leute gibt, die sich nicht ganz so wohl in Englisch fühlen, können wir versuchen, kleine Parts davon immer mal wieder zu übersetzen, damit wir niemanden verlieren. Shortly in English. This workshop is about the future, about how we can think about the future, how we can come up with the future. I'm very happy to have Envisioning with Michelle and Arthur here with us. Anna and me are from the CityLAB. We will guiding a little bit through this. If it's important, we will translate parts of it in German. And we created a poll that you can already answer to let us know how much we should translate.
Während alle noch die Umfrage antworten, sage ich nur ganz kurz was dazu. Wir unterstützen als CityLAB auch die Stadt Berlin bei der Entwicklung der neuen Smart City Strategie und deshalb passt es für uns auch total gut, weil die auch in die Zukunft blickt und wir natürlich da die Zukunft planen müssen. Deshalb freue ich mich, dass wir heute hier neue Methoden dafür kennenlernen können. Und finde es auch besonders spannend, aus der Beteiligung zu dieser Smart City Strategie haben wir gemerkt, in Berlin gibt es eine besonders kritische Einstellung zur Technologie. Aber was wir heute vielleicht versuchen wollen, ist einen eher unvoreingenommenen Blick auf Technologien zu werfen und zu überlegen, was sind unsere Bedürfnisse, wie stellen wir uns eine lebenswerte Zukunft vor und was braucht vielleicht auch unser Planet für eine lebenswerte Zukunft, um dann zu schauen, wie können Technologien uns dabei unterstützen. Und wie können wir dann auch diese Technologien dazu einsetzen, in dem Maße, wie wir das wollen. So I was just briefly referring to the smart city strategy that we are currently developing and that so far in the participation process, we always saw a very critical view on technologies by the Berliners, especially. I think that's very Berlinish to look at it very critically. So we are happy to now invite everyone to have a more open and maybe less ideologized view on technology because and to question first, how do we want to live? What is our vision for the future? And then which technologies can help us to reach this vision, but also stay within planetary boundaries, of course. So yeah, that's it from my side. So envisioning Michelle and Arce, very welcome to the CityLAB, and I'm looking forward.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Ines. Thanks for the invitation to be here. If we want to keep the session light and interactive, we know it's a hard ask to be online on a Friday afternoon and on a warm Friday afternoon. But we want to keep the conversation interactive. So we're going to invite everyone to speak up using different methods throughout the session, both with a poll, which we've opened to get a temperature check from you guys to see how much you feel technology might shape our future. So that should be in the poll here on Hopin, as well as there will be opportunities to turn on your camera or your microphone and or your camera to be part of the discussion. We want to keep this we want to involve everyone as much as possible. It's not so much a lecture as it is a roundtable, hopefully. And I'm going to jump into the slides and start talking through where we're at. So welcome, thanks for being here. So you're seeing the poll, we're getting some results in from the poll, excellent. We'll use this as a temperature check to calibrate the conversation. So my name is Michell. This image hopefully sums up my life in a nutshell. I have a dog who follows me everywhere, and I try spending as much time as possible away from the screen with mixed success. And I want to start the session by telling a story about the first time I went to Tokyo and experienced something that many of us have experienced elsewhere, which is culture shock. You go somewhere which is completely different from the places you know, and you feel this sense of confusion, you feel the sense of overload, stress, and uncertainty because you are in an environment that is profoundly different from that which you're used to experiencing. I felt this, especially in Tokyo. This was before Google Maps or even 3G, so it was extra exciting. But these feelings of culture shock that can be so prevalent, well, they were noticed by a fellow called Alvin Toffler over 50 years ago, American futurist, who noticed that we were experiencing the same thing increasingly without leaving home. So the feeling of confusion, disorientation, overload, it does not only come from experiencing a different culture, but also because the future is happening faster and faster and faster. So he calls it future shock, similar to culture shock. And so when we experience too much change in too little time, which is something I believe many of us can relate to increasingly, well, that's a known phenomenon, and it's not even new. Much on the contrary, these were the cutting edge technologies at the time that Toffler wrote Future Shock. So he managed to look at these technologies and say, this is shaping our lives faster than we can manage. And of course, for us, 50 years down the line, I don't know if you've gotten used to it or if it's just gotten worse, but we can definitely, speaking for myself at least, I still experience future shock, probably more than culture shock nowadays. And future shock is a certainty. You can be sure that you will experience future shock the more technology affects you over time. And what we want to bring to the conversation here, and what envisioning tries to do, is to bring these certainties to an uncertain world. We often feel that the future is uncertain. We often feel that technology is unpredictable. But we want to bring to you three parameters, three ways of thinking about technology and the future in such a way that you can bring more clarity and more certainty to where things are going. And future shock is one of them. If we know that there will be more and more technology, if we know that technology is going to speed up, then we know that we're going to experience more of this. And this affects how we design our cities, it affects how we make our personal decisions, etc. And we're going to talk about two more of these certainties by doing exercises with everyone here. And I'm here representing Envisioning, and we are an emerging technology research institute. We've sort of singled out the object of emerging technology and how it affects the future, and we try to make sense of that collectively to the world and with the world in an open, as open as possible formats. And we believe strongly in this intersection between the public, private, and academic. So we bring academic rigor to the work we do, to the research process we do, and we try engaging all three aspects because we believe innovation happens in that intersection. And we're a truly global organization. I'm not in Berlin experiencing the heat wave today. I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil, but we're as distributed as possible, and we look at the world as in a flat manner, so to speak. And we believe strongly in aligning our research around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So all of the research we do, every technology we identify is to some degree tagged and organized according to the grander goals of the SDGs. So we try not doing this work in a vacuum. But in order to have a conversation around what the future might look like, we first need to sort of establish a baseline of what technology actually is, or find a common language to talk about it. Alan Kay probably says it best, an American inventor. He says technology is everything invented after you were born. So if it's new, and if it was already in the world when we came about, we usually see it as technology. Whereas if it's old or built into the world, we don't really isolate it as a technology. And technology has this direction. It has a certain path that it develops over. So we can take almost any given piece of technology and see what led up to it. The Kindle began as hieroglyphs, arguably, and went through Gutenberg's printing press. There were many steps in between, obviously, but technology has this visible history and this sort of connective tissue that relates one technology to another. And that's very much what envisioning tries to both expose and track, looking at these dependencies and looking at these trajectories. And technology changes how we experience the world. It changes our expectations of the world. We used to hunt or grow things when we were hungry. Now we tap, and how this rewires our brains. This rewires our expectations of how the world is supposed to work. Once you become accustomed to certain technologies, it's very difficult to become unaccustomed with them. They will change how we perceive what is possible. And we tend to think of technology in terms of artifacts and devices. We think of the objects as technological, but we fail sometimes to see the systems as being technological as well. So we don't necessarily realize that if we isolate money, for example, money is a technology in many senses. Both the coins and the bills and the checks are technological objects, but also the concept, the system of money, the fact that we can store value in an object and then have another person recognize that value is a technology. It's a construct. It's something we've built as a society that works, that allows us to work collectively to do things that would not be possible if it wasn't for technology. Same thing with agriculture. The way that we're reshaping our planet is a direct extension of these technologies. Same thing with the harnessing of fire. Same thing with writing. All of these are technologies, and they all move in a certain direction. They all advance towards greater complexity and lower cost usually. So in a way, everything we create is technological. Everything we build, everything we make that is not of the natural world belongs to the technological world. One of the first people to realize how this speed was picking up was Gordon Moore, one of the co-founders of Intel. He gave rise to a law, Moore's law, which some people might have heard of, which basically says that things get faster, and things get cheaper, faster. So in the world of microprocessors especially, but also other aspects of technology, things will get faster and faster. So when you see something that looks to be 10 years into the future, that technology is already true, it's already happening, but in 10 years, it's going to be more affordable, it's going to be more universally accessible, and we're going to play with this a little bit in a minute, where we look at a technology that exists today, but it's set in the future, and then we're going to imagine what it looks like when we belong to that future, when that technology is accessible to all of us, and how that reshapes our expectations of the world. Because once you have exponential change, once you're on this path where things speed up in an unpredictable manner, we're naturally going to have unintended consequences. So for every exponential technology, there will be a number of consequences that are unpredictable beforehand. Some of these consequences are positive, some are negative, but they're all there. So for example, the invention and popularization of the automobile about a century and a half ago led to numerous consequences that were unpredictable by their creators. So when we invented the automobile as a society, we did not anticipate that it would lead to urbanization, suburbanization in some places of the world. We have entire cities or entire regions of the world that are designed around the automobile. And you can tell that the newer cities or newer locations are more, not even car dependent, but car centric, because they've been designed after the automobile was invented. Same thing with parking. The fact that we allocate so much space to automobiles was unpredictable when the car was created. Same thing with traffic. There was no traffic before the car. And we see this everywhere. If it wasn't for the elevator, something as trivial as vertical locomotion, we wouldn't have cities like Hong Kong. There would not be cities where you live on the 34th floor if you had to climb the stairs every day. That would be a very small market for that. So the fact that we have elevators directly leads to a shift in how cities are designed. The fact that we have air conditioning has been claimed by the founder of Singapore that it was the key technology, AC, on a day like today. But if you're in Singapore, that's every day. If you don't have AC, you can't really make decisions about how to build the government, according to the founders of Singapore. And this, of course, allows us to urbanize in different places. Of course, not all technologies revolve around urbanization, but we've given these examples to help demonstrate how something that is unrelated to cities ends up affecting them. Elevators, cars, AC, or air conditioning, all of these technologies have effects that go beyond their original intent. And again, these effects can be positive, they can be negative. What matters is they're unintended. They were not part of the plan. And one way to summarize this is we tend to overestimate the short-term effects of technology while we underestimate the long-term. In the short term, our expectations are greater than that which technology or the future allows. We expect much more of things than they do in the short term. Then we forget about them. And while we forget about them, they keep evolving, they keep getting better, faster, and cheaper. And eventually, reality overtakes our expectations. And we have to keep calibrating for this. We have to keep compensating for this mismatch between what we think will happen and what actually happens with regards to technology. And with that, I want to leave you with my dear friend and colleague and partner, Arthur.
Hi, everyone. Thank you also, Ines and Anne, for the introduction. I didn't say something before. And thank you, Michelle, as well. So my name is Arthur. I'm also Brazilian, but I'm based in Berlin, suffering with the heat today as well. And I'm one of the partners at Envisioning and leading the product development that we do. I think I chose this image to represent a bit of my take of technology. First, that I think it's always very humorous the way that it interacts with our lives, and that it's just many different tools and the way we can hack it and play it around to suit the needs that we have. So this is just a breaker, probably like a switch regulating a power, and it's just in a very locked position not to turn off or on. I think one of the things that I would like to start this discussion, I think it's one of the components of the discussion of technologies that's happening more and more recently, is that we've been distancing ourselves as in general from the understanding the actual implications, or really diving a bit deeper into what technology means or what it can do. As Anne mentioned today, that the city of Berlin has this very adverse reaction to technology, and I think different cultures and different situations also have this very shifting and polarized discussion and take on technology. But on our take, we're not in the sense of techno-optimistic, or we don't want to shy away from the discussions, but we want to tackle it and to really understand. So what we did today is to prepare one of these grounds for this discussion. We choose one recent case that could be quite meta, because we're talking about video conference, and we are here sitting virtually as well. And we can want to talk a bit about this and then bring it as a discussion for what could it mean in the future for us. So if Michelle can play the video, I don't know if you know this case, but let's see it. I don't think we have the audio, but
I will try resharing here. I think I have to click a checkbox.
Second.
Actually, no. So I can't do the audio play. So, but it's subtitled. So I'm going to run it, and we'll look at the pictures.
Just a question, if you can write on the chat just how many of you know this project or have heard this before. If you can just say yes or no or something like this. Is anyone there? I think the text is exactly on top of the subtitle.
Yeah, very unfortunate positioning. Thanks. Okay, so I can talk over a bit about what's going on. And this is the project Starline. It's, I would say that's quite an interesting experiment by Google, especially in these times that we've passed through with the pandemic and the distancing, and how often and how necessary this kind of video interactions have become. And the real challenge that they are trying to do here is how to make this a bit more real. So they applied a couple of different technologies that I'll go into more detail in front to try to bring this into a higher experience for the users that are interacting with it. So you can see that it's set in a kind of in a private booth.
Like it seems like the person is actually standing right there. It's very interesting when you look at the movement of the camera going behind the person and what happens to the person in front. You see that you can see the three-dimensionality of the people, especially in the swifting movements of the camera. So we'll send you the link afterwards if you want to watch, if you haven't seen this project yet. But what I wanted to do with this case is just to really understand and to demystify a bit of the magic, because I think sometimes there's a quote later on that we'll say about a lot of the times technology is quite indistinguishable from magic, and by Arthur C. Clarke. We want to break down a bit this paradigm that technology is this thing that we kind of distance ourselves so much. And with this example, I would like to tell you and talk a bit about a couple of key technologies that they have implemented in this case from from Project Starline that are really trying to fool our senses. In the end, like to make it real, we have to look about the way that we perceive reality, and it's through our senses. And with especially with this project, we can talk about two. So it's about sight and hearing, and there are a couple of very interesting things that they're achieving with this. So I would sum them up as basically thinking about how achieving low latency, how we talk about and how we fuel our visions with depth perception, and also talking a bit about acoustics and how we perceive space. So the interesting thing, for instance, with low latency, that this is which is quite different from what we have now. I'll make constant comparisons to Hopin, to Zoom, or other tools that we're currently using, is that this was done in such a heavy controlled environment, because there are studies that are showing that our brains start to realize that there's a gap in reality in the way that we perceive natural communication when we have a delay of hearing or seeing with over 50 milliseconds. So why am I saying this? Is because at least right now I'm using a wireless connection. I'm probably connected to a cable internet in Berlin. You're both in Berlin. Michell is in Sao Paulo. There's a long distance, and there are like outdated technologies that are covering and transmitting this data. And I could assure that you're probably receiving and seeing my voice with at least 400 milliseconds of delay, maybe up more. And this is one of the key components that we can say that when we eliminate latency is when we can start really feeling that the person is out there. I think what they're doing probably with this spoofs and with Google is that they have very controlled, maybe point-to-point connections. And just to see how hard this is, if they have had one direct line from a fiber optic line, which is the fastest way that we can transmit data at the moment, from one of the spoofs to another one, the maximum amount of distance that they could cover would be around 3,000 kilometers in the best capacity possible. And that's because of the speed of light, the time, and the speed that light travels to a fiber optic cable, and not considering any other problems. So it start to see how some disadvantages that we have in this question. The second thing that I would love to talk about this is especially these images that they're showing, because to fool our brains, like we see in 3 dimensions, and the way that Google is applying a couple of technologies, and I will notice that there are 3 key technologies that are doing this with this 3-dimensional display. So it's the way that if I'm the one seeing this image, I can perceive depth. So it's probably a holographic display. But to be able to generate this image, there are some very interesting aspects as well. So they're using a depth mapping camera that probably is projecting infrared dots on a person's face to kind of see the depth and the distance from the nose to the cheeks and everything. But the thing is, even if this is a stereoscopic camera, this image is being generated by a camera that is in a static position. But when I do this perspective that this camera is generating is already not the one that I should be seeing. So Google also uses a quite interesting device when they are capturing the image, is that they can track where my eyes are to also force this perspective from the image that is being generated. But the thing is, the camera on the other side is not moving as my eyes are. So they're using very intelligent artificial intelligence algorithms to predict. So if you're looking at me straight, you're probably not seeing like the back where my hand is. But Google, if I'm changing this, you could see this being generated. You can see this quite well when they're doing with the hairs, and this is especially like the shifting movements of the camera, which are quite interesting. So it's also a very smart way of applying this technology. And the last one, just to not bore you anymore with technical details or like these provocations, is about audio or acoustics, because it's also a very crucial way of how do we perceive space with delay, with reverb, with decay. We can tell the difference of a sound from a church to a specific environment through sound. We can also position things quite well because of the distance that time takes to reach one ear and the other, and we can notice how it bounces around. So this is also probably a quite strong component of this setup that they have, a very controlled experience with physical imaging with sound. So I think what we would like to say is that this is quite a big step from what we're having right now with Zoom or with FaceTime or any other video conference software that we're using right now and nowadays, because it's adding another level of technology layer or more advanced technologies that are really trying to go further and further into mimicking what is real with a virtual technology. So by mimicking our senses in that sense. We're speaking with Zoom, you have this delay, the audio, you're only seeing myself on a bidimensional screen. I'm a tiny thumbnail probably on your screen right now, or on your phone if you're using a phone. So that just adds layers of disconnections. And I think the narrative that we would like to provoke with this questions of unintended consequences of the virtual presence is what happens when this technology starts advancing, that maybe we add different senses to this. Maybe we can have a feeling of touch, we have smells, maybe we can start feeling temperature and different situations. And this is smudging the barrier of what virtual and reality is. So Michelle, if you want to advance, and I think I would love to invite, if people want to talk about this is a good moment to request to join with video or webcam or something like this. I see that there are some designers, data researchers, service designers, technology strategists, and things like this. So it'd be very lovely to hear a bit about you. We would really like to discuss and like play around now that we know a bit more about this technology and what it can do and what it needs to do, if there are any potential applications of those stacks in the city. And also maybe think about second and third order effects, like what is the unintended consequences with that? As Michelle mentioned, cars were a faster way for people to move longer, faster, but also led to very interesting consequences in the way our cities are developed and everything. So this is a good moment to maybe say hello or
unmute yourselves. Yeah.
In the meantime, maybe we can briefly summarize, because there were 4 persons who said they were more comfortable in German. So I quickly maybe try and summarize in German. Also wir haben jetzt gerade als letztes eine Technologie vorgestellt bekommen von Google, die heißt Skyline, und da geht es vor allem darum, wie Videotelefonie auf das nächste Level gehoben wird. Arce hat da auch ein paar technische Details erläutert, die ich jetzt so aus dem Kopf nicht wiedergeben kann, aber im Grunde läuft es daraus hinaus, dass es eine Gleichzeitigkeit gibt. Es gibt keine Verzögerungsmomente mehr. Man kann einander viel besser im Detail wahrnehmen und vor allem auch viel besser verstehen. Und jetzt ist die Frage von Arce und Michell, was sind die Konsequenzen vielleicht auch für unser urbanes Zusammenleben? Was sind da die möglichen Konsequenzen auf unsere Städte, wenn diese Technologie in 10, 20 Jahren verfügbar ist und wahrscheinlich auch für viele Menschen zugänglich geworden ist. Das hatte Michell in seinem ersten Vortrag gezeigt, dass sehr, sehr viele Technologien innerhalb von 10 Jahren von dem sehr exotischen Status zu allgemein verfügbaren Technologien und vor allem sehr günstigeren Technologien werden. Und
so the third chapter that we want to present and design an exercise around is around this relationship of science fiction and science fact. We believe that imagination informs innovation. What does this mean? Imagination is everything that's possible in your mind. Innovation is what can actually be done. And there's a funnel. Imagination is much greater than innovation. And we believe in the importance of imagination, of thinking big, especially around technology, especially around the future. And we notice this by this strong correlation that exists between science fiction and science fact. The ideas that were dreamt up in novels, video games, movies, books of all sorts, and how that often translates into reality. So Rosie the robot from the Jetsons is a much chattier version than the Roombas and iRobot and Dysons that we have. Some of us have roaming around our houses. It does one of the things that the cleanup, the robot today does one of the things that the science fiction idea did in the past, but there's this direct correlation. This tends to happen over and over and over again. This isn't about sight impairment specifically, but it's an extension of what happens. So in Black Mirror, there's an episode, I want to say it's from the first series, I think it's called Be Right Back, where these contact lenses exist, where you can have you can project images on your retinas based on these sci-fi screens, and that's the image on the left. The image on the right is this is happening in reality. I forget the name of the company, but there are numerous attempts at building these types of contact lenses for different purposes, including augmenting your sense of sight. Similarly, the image on the left is from Ready Player One with haptic gloves and virtual reality interfaces. The image on the right is a company, I want to say Facebook picked up a couple of years ago, which does exactly that. It could have been a prop from the movie, but the image on the right is an actual technology which gives you haptic feedback. It makes you feel like you're touching things in virtual reality. If you're grabbing an object, you'll feel it filling your hand. You'll feel the weight of it. So that input and output from your hand can be directly integrated into the virtual reality experience, all of which goes back to Arthur's point about immersion and creating this virtual sense of presence through technology. So the correlation between science fiction and science fact, imagination oftentimes will show the way to what will happen in reality. There are many ways of measuring this. We employ something called TRL for technology readiness level, and it's a simple scale from 1 to 9. It's used by, it's an aerospace standard, and it basically says that if it's a low number, it means the idea is still being trialed and conceptualized. As the number goes up, the product becomes more and more and more real. It's validated, it becomes a prototype, and finally a product. And we explore this metric and a few others extensively in our research. So at any given moment, this is a snapshot for right now, where a Dyson swarm at the very low end of TRL. A Dyson swarm is a sci-fi concept where you cover a planet or a star with energy absorbing panels or satellites. You start utilizing all the energy emitted by a star and turning that into computation probably. Well, that's TRL 1. There are a lot of novels and sci-fi series that discuss it. And we've seen very little of it actually happening in reality. But on the other side of the spectrum, things like temperature tracking systems, these were at TRL 4, 5, 6 only a few years ago, and we had to speed up development. We had to make them real, we had to make them affordable and ubiquitous over the last 18 months because of everything going on with COVID. Of course, we used to see these as airports in the past. Now we're seeing them much more frequently, or at least those who are leaving their houses. And so we can see technologies, they're always progressing up the scale, some of them faster, some of them slower, but they all exist at different levels. And with that, we want to show a piece of research produced by Envisioning. I think Arthur will take over the screen share.
So we did research where we looked at key technologies that are impacting cities, in our opinion. And we look at a couple of different sectors. What you see here, and this link is public, as most of the research that we're doing is available for you to access. So we have separated technologies in different areas. So there are different domains that we organize them: civic engagement, governance, logistics, mobility, security, and so forth. whenever you click on one of those technologies, and this is the discussion that we're trying to say, you can have the TRL scale of this technology, you have a summary, you have quite a good description of what it is, a little provocation on possible future perspectives of this, the association with the different sustainable goals that we've mentioned, and also quite a resourceful sources for you to investigate a bit more on these technologies. So I think right now we have, for this project, around maybe 200 technologies. I don't remember exactly the number, but we've developed a couple of scenarios and then that are also projecting how different technologies can also make a difference in our lives. And for this, we chose specifically how can we use technologies to interface in a different way with the city. We can use this case of the Project Starline as well. We can use the question that who did it regarding vision and auditory capabilities as well. Missed the chat here, the message, but it's also a good way to spark a debate on this. So if Michelle wants to maybe go back to the screen for a second.
Yes. So I also dropped the links in the chat. So what we've done, because the radar can be quite overwhelming if you've never navigated it before, we've isolated one of these scenarios called the extended cityverse. That would be the second link in the chat. And what we want to invite you to do, we know we're coming up on time, but over the next 5 minutes or so, we want you to check out the links and to look around at these technologies, either within the extended cityverse or from the radar at large. This is what it's going to look like. Oh yeah, so it's went back.
Yep.
I think yeah, great. So I'll stop my sharing here. Cool.
So one of the things that we promoted here, this is a text that's showcasing some of those technologies. We're talking about a specific and some opportunities and challenges that we can talk. And I was wondering if we still have time to discuss maybe about one challenge that we have with interacting in the city. And for instance, I could bring an anecdotal story that I've been hearing quite often, especially here in Berlin, because of the restrictions of movements and the general structure of the Ausländerbehörde or the Bürgeramt that is having quite a problem. I have friends that have been fully vaccinated, but they cannot travel at the moment because they cannot get appointments to renew their Ausweis or their passport or things like this. Or also people that have expired visas that because of the structure that we have and the way that these intercommunications are happening, we are restricted, for instance, to accessing those public services. And I wonder if there are different technologies or different ways and that we could change this to maybe solve some of these issues as well.
So with that, I think we're coming up on time. I think Arthur summed it up really well. I love that the chat engagement is that we're working our conversation out through the chat. I really enjoy seeing this, and it feels like we stirred the right emotions in the participants here today. And I think that was our intent, was to kick off this conversation and try bringing sort of a more leveled approach to this dialogue. So I would really want to thank CityLAB, Ines and Anne and Nadine for organizing this and getting us involved. And I wish everyone a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks a lot also from our side. We can leave the chat also a little bit more open. So if you want to discuss, take your time. You have a few more minutes, or you can ask Nadine if she can leave it open. So don't hurry. And yeah, a big thanks from our side, from the CityLAB, to you, Arthur and Michelle, for giving this workshop with us. And I hope to see you soon in the context of CityLAB somewhere in the future.